And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Hello, I'm National Weather Service meteorologist Peter Chan with your Alaska Marine Weather Outlook on this Sunday, April 21st. And this outlook will be for early in the week, Monday and Tuesday. We start with the sea ice edge. And on this Sunday afternoon, there still is plenty of ice in through Kuskokwim Bay and around Nunavik Island. The ice actually did make an advancement southward at least last week. But now as winds go back around more toward an easterly flow, we don't expect that to continue. And there'll be a stronger frontal system pushing through the Pribilofs here as we go through Monday afternoon into Monday night and eventually pushing up near the southwest coast as we get into Tuesday. And that's also going to cause winds to be more southeasterly. So looking at the weather map later tonight into early Monday morning, we have kind of a double-barrel low-pressure system out through the western Aleutians and the triple point of the occluded front where the transitions to a warm cold front. This feature is going to be slow to move eastward. It's not racing eastward, but will be out that way for a couple of days. We have a low also in the North Pacific that's going to drift a little more northward, may fling some rain showers back toward Kodiak Island Monday night into Tuesday. And then a dissipating cold front as it works its way further into northwest Canada. And the mainland should be relatively quiet. We still have kind of a vestige of weak ridge of high pressure, more so in the mid and upper levels of the atmosphere. But the main weather feature this week, or at least early in the week, will be this low out here in through the western Aleutians that could bottom out down near 970 millibars. The front then begins to advance northeastward and eastward, so by Tuesday afternoon it'll be pushing up into the Alaska Peninsula, maybe all the way up to the north there around St. Lawrence Island. But notice, again, it's quite wrapped up, central pressure just above 970 millibars. So across the southeast, after just a week of gorgeous spring weather, warm temperatures, starting to see a few light showers now in the area. Some moisture is pushed up from the south. We're looking at a variable wind field across the inner channels, northeast 10 knots, Lynn Canal, waves a foot or two, south winds to 10 knots, Stevens Passage, waves a foot or two there, and then southeast winds up to 15 knots, Dixon Entrance with waves of 2 to 3 feet. The outer coast, southeasterly 20-knot winds outside the icy strait corridor running on down off of Sitka and Craig with swells right around 5 feet. Easterly winds 15 knots outside of Yakutat Bay to Cape Suckling. And then Tuesday, we're going to see northerly winds throughout the inner channels around 10 knots, waves generally a foot or two. Offshore flow northeasterly, Sitka down through Craig at 10 knots. And then look for winds to be more west to northwest there. As you get west of Gustavus and back toward Cape Suckling, swells 6, maybe 7 feet. Across the northwestern Gulf, winds have come down here in lower Cook Inlet, easterly at 15 knots, still northeasterly 10 knots off of Anchor Point, variable in the far north around Turnagain Arm, 10 knots, waves a foot or two. Outside of Hinchinbrook Entrance, we're looking at east winds 15 to 20 knots and then easterly winds to 10 knots there in the wider expanse of Prince William Sound. On Tuesday, winds should be variable around Prince William Sound at 10 knots with waves a foot or two. Outside of Hinchinbrook Entrance, also variable winds to 10 knots. Easterly winds, though, lower Cook Inlet at 20 knots with swells of 5-6 feet, and northeast winds 10 to 15 knots from upper through middle Cook Inlet. Kodiak Island, we'll see some lighter winds, variable around 10 knots on the east side for Monday. Northeast winds 15 knots within Shelikof Strait. But as we go down along the Alaska Peninsula, southeast winds are going to increase 20 to 30 knots on the North Pacific side and 25 to as high as 40 knots north of Cold Bay, where waves could be running about 4 feet. Tuesday, winds will generally be out of the east-southeast, 15 to 20 knots around Kodiak Island, upper peninsula here, but through the lower section of the peninsula for east-southeast winds around 25 knots. Strongest winds are going to be back out through the Aleutians on Monday. We're looking at 35 to 45 knot southeasterly gales in the eastern Aleutians around Dutch Harbor. As we go further west where the low center is near and just northwest between Shimei and Kiska, we're looking at gales of 35, southwest gales ahead of the low, 35 to 40 knots there east of Kiska, but on the backside, winds go north and then westerly, west of Kiska, south of Shimei, 45 knot gales, waves at least 20 feet, and highest waves will be just west of Shimmy up around 25 feet. For Tuesday, that low just moves a little further eastward, north of the central Aleutians, and the wind field wrapping around it. Ahead of it, southerly winds, 20-25 knots, far eastern Aleutians, but 35 to 40 knot gales, especially west of Nikolsky through Atka. And then as we get back where winds shift southwest and then northwesterly, we're looking at 35 to as high as 45 knot gales during the day on Tuesday. Along the southwest coast, south winds into Bristol Bay and Kuskokwim Bay on Monday at 20 knots, but 40 knot southeasterly gales with seas as high as 15 feet in the vicinity of the Pribilovs. And then offshore flow around 10 knots, lower Yukon Delta, southeast winds there within Norton Sound 10 knots as well. For Tuesday, southeast winds will be dominant here along the southwest coast. Southeast winds of 25 to 30 knots within Bristol Bay, Kuskokwim Bay through Etolan Strait. And easterly off of the Yukon Delta and easterly 15 knots out of Norton Sound, but look for south winds to 25 knots around St. Paul, St. George, and 35 knot southeast gales with 10 to 12 foot swells around St. Matthew. Passing down through the lower Chukchi Sea and the Bering Strait, winds will be east-northeast through the lower Chukchi Sea at 25 knots, turning northerly at 20 knots through the Bering Strait, and then north-northeast winds to 20 knots west side of the Seward Peninsula from Wales down to the north side of St. Lawrence Island. In the far Arctic, winds northeasterly Utqiagvik on through Prudhoe Bay, but westerly to 15 knots at Kaktovik. And by Tuesday, winds should generally be out of the east, 15 to 20 knots along the Arctic coast down through Wainwright and Point Ley. And as we drop down through the lower Chukchi Sea, also a continuation of east winds, 10 to 15 knots, and generally 15 knot offshore flow out of Norton Sound and the Seward Peninsula for Tuesday, but maybe as high as 25 knots on the north side of St. Lawrence Island, especially there at Gamble.